Well, thanks very much to our guest, Tim Kent, Lib Dem Council and Bristol City Council, also on the Audit Committee, and keeping a good close eye on our mayor, as close as he can, as close as the mayor will let him, and also making sure that people in Bristol know, the council taxpayers, when we are not being told information, which of course the idea is that there will be no news stories because there will be no press release from the mayor's office. But thankfully the Lib Dems will be informing us, and Tim particularly and others, when things are not being shared in a kind of corporate, in a way rather like a corporate boardroom, don't want to share their little secrets, their nasty little secrets, and things that they're up to with the public. It completely goes against, in my view, the whole public service ethos, and indeed Bristol City Council's own code of conduct, which I read out earlier on, which I'll put a link up to on our show page at thisweek.org.uk. So thank you, Tim. And we'll be back with Martin after we've heard some music. And this time we're going to be hearing from Stereolab, a great favourite band of mine from 1994. And, someone we don't hear enough of on the radio, that's Tracy Chapman. Talking about a revolution. Well, that's Tracy Chapman, and before that you heard Stereolab and a song called Ping Pong. And we are having a look first here tonight at hacking in the US elections. Well, it's not the Venezuelans, the Russians, Cambridge Analytica, or even China. Biden, by the way, is known to be particularly friendly with China. And the enemy within this time, it's Professor Robert Epstein. He's a Democrat, but he says his research on Google algorithms indicates a roughly 30 percentage point swing to Biden from Trump for anybody foolish enough to research the candidates on the Google search engine, plus a closer look at the oligarchs who hope to take over the world, Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab. That look by Scottish journalist turned civil liberties podcaster Natalie Minnis. So, Martin Summers, can we just start with this incredible story from, actually it's a while ago this, but it's passed me by, but we have covered this guy, Robert Epstein, before. Nothing to do, of course, with Jeffrey Epstein. This guy is a doctor, and he is this is in the midst of the actual election itself, publishing. He's a Harvard-trained Democrat. He's disclosing findings from his 2020 election research, saying that he reckons a 30% swing, but he's saying at least 6 million votes swung from Biden, from Trump to Biden. I keep saying that. I don't know why, but he's saying okay. So I'll just read you out the little bit from World Net Daily. Google's search engine manipulation in the 2020 election could have shifted a minimum of 6 million votes to Democrat Joe Biden, according to research psychologist Dr. Robert Epstein. The Harvard-trained researcher, Democrat voter, told Fox News' Tucker Carlson that he had 733 field agents in the swing states of Arizona, North Carolina and Florida collecting data. Field agents, he calls them. Sounds almost like the CIA, doesn't it? But Google search results were strongly biased in favour of liberals and Democrats. This was not true on Bing or Yahoo. The researchers collected 500,000 election-related searches, which is about 30 times more data than his team collected back in 2016. They found 4 years ago, as WND World Net Daily reported in an interview with Epstein, that biased results generated by Google's algorithm likely impacted undecided voters in a way that gave at least 2.6 million votes to Hillary Clinton and as many as 10.4 million. Epstein noted the bias was being shown to pretty much every demographic group we looked at, including conservatives. Conservatives got slightly more bias in their search results than liberals did. So how do you account for that, he asked. Well, the researchers also found out what he called a smoking gun. We found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. He said, after going public with our findings, Google he believes, backed off. They literally shut off that manipulation that night. And so 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everybody, finally. So this is a whole aspect to vote rigging, Martin, that we don't really get covered by the BBC or anybody much in the international Western media. And it's the idea that the search algorithms can be used to swing elections. In this case, what Robert Epstein is alleging here himself is he reckons at least 6 million votes.
Well, I'm totally unsurprised by this. I mean, Google is a corporation, and it's got it's not a public body. And just as if you pick up the Daily Mail, you're not going to find Jeremy Corbyn being given a fair crack of the whip. Google, given the existing setup, are perfectly within their rights to fiddle the search. It's not fiddling the searches, because you're not guaranteed. If you use Google as a search engine, you're basically saying, I want to use Google, and therefore they've got you over a barrel. And of course, this is the way in which all political campaigns are now functioning. They're trying to target micro segments of the electorate in order to send them the things which are going to change their minds in the direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about
the same as the
advertising
side.
I'm going to do an unbiased search.
Micro targeting.
You're not saying I'm going to do a search anymore. You're saying I trust Google to do the search for me. And
well, indeed, just as people pick up newspapers or listen to the BBC is a public body, and therefore there is some comeback if they're shown to be biased in what they're presenting. But Google should be nationalised and made to function as a public service.
Their complaints process is just about as effective as Bristol City Council's complaints process, in my experience. And this, of course, is why people don't bother engaging with it, because they find it doesn't actually operate for them.
I would argue that these monopolistic tech companies should be taken into public ownership and run as a public utility, just like the banks should be. But while they're run as a private enterprise, which is what they are, then you see what's happening is the right wing are complaining now that Google's got a liberal bias. But of course, they've got their Fox News, which doesn't have a liberal bias. It's got a pro-Trump bias, but they don't complain about that.
Well, I think Epstein
Fox News have to give Biden a fair crack of the whip. And the answer is, in the current setup, no, they don't have to.
Epstein is a fascinating guy. I think he says he's famed. He was famed behavioural psychologist B.F. Skinner's last PhD student at Harvard. He's been a research psychologist for nearly 40 years, served in various editorial positions at Psychology Today magazine and Scientific American Mind, which is not Scientific American. It must be some sort of offshoot of it. He's the author of 15 books and more than 300 scientific and mainstream articles on artificial intelligence and other topics. In testimony a year ago to the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, he emphasised he is not a conservative. I'm here today, he says, for 3 reasons: to explain why Google presents a serious threat to democracy and to human autonomy, to explain how passive monitoring systems can protect us both now and in the future from companies like Google, and to tell you how Congress can immediately end Google's worldwide monopoly on search. Well, they don't totally have a monopoly, but they basically do, don't they, Martin? Everyone uses it. In fact, we use the word Google like we used to use the word Hoover. It's just a brand name instead of actually what the purpose of the job should be. And it's got a tremendous amount of trust. And they've managed somehow, Google, I don't know how they've done this, but to just have this kind of fluffy, cuddly, we trust Google, we love Google feel to them for many people. In fact, but many people do trust their entire correspondence to Google, which they shouldn't do. I mean, I remember finding out when I was writing for Russia Today that I'd sent an email which contained an article I'd just written about Google to the Gmail address of one of the staff at RT, because they were finding that it was if people were sending from Gmail addresses, they wouldn't arrive at the RT's own in-house email addresses. Google must have been censoring those. But once the RT staff opened Gmail accounts, these articles by various correspondents started arriving. And so I sent mine to a Gmail account at RT about Google, and it never arrived. It just got disappeared and spirited away down a plug hole on its way to RT. And that was one of the things that alerted them to that. Then from then on, they asked people to send articles to two email addresses, to their Gmail address and also to the in-house address. But there's an enormous amount of potential with a monopolistic company like Google, Martin, who's working now very closely, of course, with Bill Gates' Microsoft, to use that monopoly to control communications rather than facilitate them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same problem. I mean, Noam Chomsky pointed out years ago. I mean, basically, these are money-making corporations, and they're basically selling you soap powder, telephones, all sorts of things, and they also
a lot of their wealth, of course, is in tax havens, isn't it? And they put themselves in legal jurisdictions. They base themselves in places where they pay no tax, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, they're profit maximising private enterprise monopolies, and the ultimate, I would argue that they should ultimately be run as public utilities, and that means that they would have an obligation to make sure that if you make a search, the whole idea behind the internet was if you put in a search term, what most other people were looking for, that would come up first. Whereas, of course, what they're doing now is they are basically manipulating the feed that you get on your smartphone as you're going around about your business. Now, ultimately, this is the way society is going in general. So, of course, other corporations that want to sell stuff are micro-targeting their advertising and all the rest of it, making sure you don't see certain things and that you do see other things. And that just spills straight over into politics. And, people running electoral campaigns, particularly in the US, where there's a huge amount of money invested in these campaigns, that they've got tech people who are basically trying to manipulate the feeds of people on their smartphones. Now, the only way to stop this is, I mean, you could just say, well, that's just how it is. We're going to have Google over here, and then you could set up an alternative, which would be a conservative version, like Cambridge Analytica were accused of doing exactly that. You've also got intelligence agencies out there, your Brigade 77, your Israelis, tech industry people who are trying to manipulate the information flow. And, we're saturated in information, but it's all manipulated. And, we need to take a step back and create a public space, which is a genuinely public space, so that elections could be more free and fair. But, that's part of the whole process of trying to change the political system so that it's more responsive.
It'd be nice if we could even just have elections at all. That would be good. But this Bilderberg big tech is quite a bizarre phenomenon, isn't it? Can you imagine meeting Eric Schmidt down the pub and saying, well, how much for 6 million votes to swing in your direction? And let's make it clear, the way that Google does this is it ups positive stories about candidates and downs negative stories about them if it's trying to promote them, and it does the opposite.
Yeah, but that's
on
exactly
the other side.
What
So, if there's a candidate that it wants to make look bad, that what it will do is it will boost up the negative stories about that candidate on the searches, and it uses its algorithms to do that, but it makes nothing public about the fact that that's what it's doing. And then, of course, the other thing about these massive Bilderberg big tech firms is that they are using vast amounts of energy. This is something which is hardly ever addressed in the Green debate. But late in last year, in March 2020, on the BBC, there was a documentary called Dirty Streaming, the Internet's Big Secret, which is still available on the iPlayer, I believe, and I'll put a link up to that on our show page at thisweek.org.uk. Plus, in November, ITV Dispatches, Channel 4 Dispatches, broadcast a superb documentary called Is Your Online Habit Killing the Planet?